He came every morning just after the sun cracked the edge of the skyline, when the streets of East Halden were still damp from the night's breath and the air carried that metallic scent of old train rails and forgotten rain. His name was Silas Ward, though no one in the neighborhood ever used it. To them, he was just the man with the coat, a figure carved from shadow and routine, who walked the same path each day with a girl trailing behind him like a ghost tethered to his silence. The garage he entered was tucked beneath the old viaduct, a squat concrete relic from a time when the city still believed in industry. Its door was rusted, its walls tagged with layers of graffiti that told stories no one bothered to read. But Silas read them. Every morning, before he turned the handle, he paused, not to check for danger, but to listen. To remember. The way the wind curled through the alley, the way the pigeons scattered from the wires above, the way the silence pressed against his chest like a weight he'd carried for decades. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just moved, like a man walking through the pages of a book only he could read. The girl's name was Naomi. She never spoke on the walk. Her steps were light, deliberate, always 3 paces behind. She wore a denim jacket too thin for the season and carried a backpack stitched with patches from places she'd never been. Her eyes were sharp, but tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much history in too small a body. People watched them. They whispered. They speculated. But no one ever asked. And Silas never explained. He didn't owe the world his story. He'd already paid more than enough. Naomi didn't know why she followed him, not exactly. She only knew that the first time she saw him disappear into that garage, something in her chest shifted. Like a compass needle twitching toward a forgotten direction. She'd waited outside for hours that day, until he emerged again, his coat dusted with ash and his eyes unreadable. He'd looked at her, not with surprise, not with suspicion, but with recognition. And then he'd nodded. Just once. That was all it took. Inside the garage, the air was colder than the street. Not just in temperature, but in memory. The kind of cold that settled into your bones and made you remember things you'd buried deep. Silas didn't turn on the overhead light. He preferred the desk lamp in the corner, its shade tilted to cast long shadows across the floor. Naomi sat on the crate near the wall, her fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of instant coffee. She didn't drink it. She just held it, like it gave her permission to stay. Silas moved slowly, deliberately, pulling back the tarp that covered the upright piano in the corner. It was battered, one leg shorter than the others, its keys yellowed with age. He sat, his fingers hovering above the keys like they were afraid to touch. Then, without ceremony, he began to play. It wasn't a song. Not really. More like a memory trying to find its way out. The notes were uneven, fractured, like pieces of a life scattered across time. Naomi closed her eyes. The music filled the space between them, soft and broken. She didn't know why she came here every day. Not exactly. But she knew what it felt like to be invisible. And Silas, he saw her. Not with pity. Not with curiosity. Just saw her. Silas had once been someone. Before the silence. Before the fire. Before Lena. He'd worn suits tailored in Midtown, taught composition at the conservatory, conducted orchestras that filled halls with velvet seats and champagne intermissions. He'd written pieces that made critics weep and students dream. But all of that had burned. Literally. The apartment had gone up in flames while he was on stage, mid-performance. Faulty wiring, they said. Tragic accident. Lena had been home. She'd been reading. She never made it out. Silas never played again. Not in public. Not for applause. Only here, in the garage beneath the tracks, where the music didn't need to be perfect, it just needed to be honest. He didn't talk about her often. But when he did, his voice changed. Softened. She used to hum while cooking, he said once. Never the same tune twice. Naomi had nodded, not because she understood, but because she respected the silence between his words. Naomi's story wasn't written in headlines. It was scribbled in margins. Foster homes. Missed meals. A mother who disappeared into the system and a father who never showed up. She'd learned early how to disappear in plain sight. How to make herself small. How to survive. The garage was the first place that didn't ask her to explain. She'd found it by accident, ducking inside to escape the rain. Silas had been playing. He didn't stop. She sat. He nodded. That was the beginning. And so it went. Day after day. No questions. No expectations. Just music and silence and the slow, fragile stitching of something that felt like healing. People still talked. They always do. But the truth was simpler than they imagined. Silas wasn't saving Naomi. And Naomi wasn't saving Silas. They were just sharing the quiet. Holding space for each other's ghosts. Silas kept playing long after the light outside shifted from the pale gray of morning to the muted gold of late afternoon, his fingers moving over the keys as if they were tracing the edges of a memory too fragile to hold. The garage smelled faintly of oil and rain-soaked concrete, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and followed you home. Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor now, her back against the wall, watching him in the way you watch a fire, not for the flames themselves, but for the way they made the shadows dance. She thought about asking him what the song was, but she already knew the answer. It wasn't a song. It was a confession without words. She wondered if he knew how much she needed this place. Not the garage itself, but the ritual of it, the walk, the silence, the music. Out there, the city was a constant roar, a place where people brushed past you without seeing you, where your name could vanish from every record and no one would notice. In here, time slowed. The air felt heavier, as if it carried the weight of everything they didn't say. She thought about the first time she'd stepped inside, dripping from the rain, her shoes squeaking on the concrete. He hadn't looked up right away, and when he did, there was no surprise in his eyes. Just that small, almost imperceptible nod, as if he'd been expecting her all along. Silas stopped playing and let his hands rest on the keys. "You ever think about what sound looks like?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Naomi tilted her head. "Looks like." He nodded. "Yeah. I see it sometimes. Not colors, not shapes. More like the way light bends through water." That's what her voice looked like. He didn't have to say Lena's name. Naomi had learned to read the spaces in his sentences. She didn't answer, just let the silence stretch between them until it felt like part of the conversation. He stood, joints stiff, and crossed to the workbench in the corner. There was a small wooden box there, the kind that looked like it might hold jewelry or letters. He opened it and took out a photograph, edges curled from years of handling. He held it for a long moment before passing it to her. The woman in the picture was laughing, head thrown back, eyes closed. Naomi traced the outline of her face with her gaze, memorizing it. "She looks like she knew things," Naomi said quietly. Silas smiled, but it was the kind of smile that hurt. She did. She knew how to make a room feel like it was listening to you. Naomi handed the photo back, careful not to smudge it. She wanted to ask him why he kept coming here, why he played for hours in a place no one else cared about. But she already knew. This was the last place Lena's voice still lived. And maybe, in some way, it had become the first place Naomi's voice was starting to grow. Silas didn't notice the cold anymore. The garage had its own climate, its own weather system built from dust and memory. Outside, the city shifted through its hours, buses groaning at corners, shopkeepers dragging metal shutters, the occasional siren slicing the air, but in here, time was stubborn. It refused to move unless they moved it. Naomi had started bringing things. Small things. A book with no cover. A cracked harmonica. Once, a jar of marbles she'd found in a box outside a thrift store. She never explained them, and Silas never asked. He just placed them on the shelf above the workbench, where they joined the quiet museum of objects that meant something only to the two of them. One evening, the rain came hard, hammering the roof in a rhythm that almost matched the piano. Silas played louder, as if competing with the storm, each chord striking the air like a defiance against the downpour. Naomi sat closer than usual, her knees nearly brushing the side of the bench, her eyes fixed on his hands. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely rising above the rain. Silas didn't look at her. Leaving what? This place. This city. All of it. He let the question hang in the air, his fingers slowing on the keys until the music became a whisper. "I've left before," he said finally. "Doesn't change what you carry." Naomi thought about that, about the weight she carried in her chest, the kind that made it hard to breathe some mornings. Maybe he was right. Maybe geography didn't matter. The weeks that followed were colder. Winter pressed in, and the garage became a place where their breath hung in the lamplight like smoke. Silas began bringing a thermos of tea, pouring it into two mismatched mugs. Naomi started reading aloud from the book with no cover. The pages were brittle, the words faded, but her voice filled the space between the notes of the piano. Sometimes Silas would stop playing just to listen. She noticed that. She noticed everything. One night, she arrived to find the garage door already open. Silas was sitting on the floor, the wooden box in his lap. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, his shoulders rounded, his eyes far away. "I had a dream," he said without preamble. She was standing in the kitchen, humming. "I could smell the bread in the oven. And then I woke up, and it was gone." Naomi sat beside him. She didn't touch him, didn't try to comfort him. She just stayed. After a while, he handed her the box. "If I'm not here one day, this is yours." She wanted to ask why, but the words felt too heavy to lift. She just nodded. The next morning, he wasn't there. Naomi waited. Hours passed. The trains came and went overhead, their rumble shaking the walls. She finally unlocked the garage with the key he'd given her months ago. Inside, the piano sat uncovered, a single sheet of music on the stand. It wasn't finished. Half the notes were missing, as if he'd run out of time. She sat at the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys the way his had. And then she began to play. The sound was clumsy, uneven, but it filled the garage. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the music stayed, fragile, imperfect, and alive, carrying both of their ghosts in every trembling note. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories.